Welcome. I'm Lori Lee Binstock, and this is a Trauma Survivor Thrivers podcast. Thank you so much for joining us for a Trauma Survivor Thrivers podcast on Mental Health News Radio Network. This podcast is also available wherever you get your podcasts, but I do suggest checking out Mental Health News Radio Network to find all your podcasts related to mental health. Today's guest is Reginald Reed, author of The Day My Mother Never Came Home, a memoir that plays out more like a true crime story. Reginald is also an accomplished professional in the pharmaceutical industry. He holds a master's degree in business and global marketing, and he's also an advocate for mental health within the Black community. Reggie, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Well, your story is it does play out like I mean it could have been on an NBC Dateline story. Your mother was murdered. Your father was, I believe they arrested him, and you
Yes.
were you weren't put in foster care. Were you taken care of by family?
No. So, and that's part of the more compelling or interesting twist to this whole story is that my mother was murdered when I was 6.
Mm.
And that's when, life kind of, not kind of, but was turned upside down for my dad and I. But no, my dad raised me. Like my
Oh,
dad raised me. Back then, 1986, they did a thorough investigation um, of the murder, and as time went on, the case went cold.
right.
So I wasn't put in foster care. I wasn't living with grandparents or anything like that. My dad was my own, my surviving parent who raised me throughout childhood, my teenage years, and early adulthood. And then nearly 40 years later, when I was, actual adult, I get a call stating that he was indicted for the murder of my mother.
Mm.
So it's kind of like living through one trauma at the beginning years of my life and then have to face another trauma at the on the second half of my life. So you can
Right.
only imagine it's like both ends, right? So we
Mm.
got you in the front and we get you on the back end.
Wow, wow. And I can at 6 years old, I mean, those are really formative years where you're really, not necessarily becoming who you are, but you're the brain development,
Yes.
you need the love of, folks around you. What was that like growing up without a mother so early on? In such a tragic way.
Yeah, it was. No, I really didn't. The stories I hear people share with me is that I was a mama's boy,
Mm.
like most, you know, young boys, right? My wife and I, we have I'm sorry, not six, a 4-year-old son and a 2-month-old daughter. But our 4-year-old, he's a mama's boy, right?
Mhm.
He when I leave, he's not asking my wife, "Where's dad at?" But if mama leaves, he's like, "Where's mama? When she's coming back?" So, but back to my point, it's like growing up, I was a mama's boy, but I didn't really actually realize what happened until a few years later. I recall looking at a interview that I did maybe a month after the murder
Oh, wow.
with a detective. And this interview was a 6-year-old boy, which was me, interviewing with a detective. And the detective was asking me questions, trying to get me comfortable. And one thing that just stays in my mind is that she got to the point where she asked, "Who's at the house? Who's in your current household?" and I was, I had a Labrador, like a golden lab named Duke.
Mhm.
So I was just going down the list. I was like, well, it is me, my dad, my dog Duke, and then when I got to my mother, I looked at my dad in that video and I was kind of confused, right? I was like, well, and my dad interjected and said that, oh yeah, your mom's still here, but spiritually, right? Like she's still here. So, I was confused. Like I knew she wasn't, this is a month out. I knew she wasn't there. She wasn't coming home. I wasn't seeing her. But as you mentioned, it was just kind of hard to just realize and unpack what really was going on,
Mhm.
within our family. And later, I don't know exact, but later, I realized that, she wasn't coming back. She was gone forever. But I didn't know the details
Mhm.
of what happened until like years later. Like when I was in my early teenage years, that's when I began to build up the courage and curiosity to do my own research.
Wow.
Um, so yeah, that's I'm not sure if you remember, back in the day, they had this resource called microfilm. It was, this before the internet and all
Mhm.
that. So it was a resource that was housed at the local library. I'm sure they
Yeah.
had other places, but I
Yeah.
was able to access it at our local university library, where it's film. Like it's like a cartridge, and it housed all like media information, publications from the newspaper. But it just goes. It's like I guess encyclopedia. Well, not encyclopedia, but just an archive.
Archive, yeah,
Yeah,
of
of
all these news clippings,
yeah. So
newspapers.
at that time, I was like, let me just poke around, right? So I researched the date of the local paper, which was called the Daily Star in Hammond, Louisiana. So I researched the date, researched the time, and just kind of flipped through until I found the article.
Oh, wow.
And it was front page. I forget verbatim how it was typed, but it was like local woman murdered or whatever. And that was my mother. And
Wow.
it was very, very graphic in detail. Like it, and I'm saying one murder or crime is better or worse than the other, but this was very intentional. She was stabbed over a dozen times, brutally beaten the head, left
Mm.
unclothed in her car, and
Wow.
she had an umbrella in between her legs. So it was very, very sadistic and tragic, right? And me, as in my early teen years, seeing that for the first time was like, I, it was like I was in a twilight zone. It was like I was reading something about someone else.
Right.
I'm like, this is not my mother. You follow me? Like I couldn't just
Wow.
conceptualize the fact that this is my mother. So
And what did you do? Like, you walked out of the library, and what did you do after that? Did you ask your father? Did you ask
no,
anybody?
I didn't,
Oh,
because it was that, this was years later, and it was that fine. It was like the elephant in the room, right? We
mm.
didn't really discuss. We discuss, her, as being the mother, and that we miss her from time to time, but we really, excuse me, didn't discuss the details or just the tragedy, right? Because
Right, right. And you were young.
yeah, you could, and as a father now, it's like,
You
like like come on, like you don't want to. You're trying to move forward.
right, right,
You're not trying to stay in this, this area of darkness. You're trying to see light. So
right.
I didn't bring it up, and it was it, but the self reflection was like, man, it just really hit me in a way. I was like, I can't. Like it was surreal. I just couldn't believe it. and just thought it was made up.
Wow.
This can't be true.
Did you seek counseling? Were you able to seek counseling?
Um, I don't recall. I think I did at
Like after it
maybe
happened?
yeah, after it happened, I may have saw something, but throughout my life, I really never that I recall. I never, a couple of times here and there, but I I really didn't, and that's what I think, and that's what I share now. Just coming, writing this memoir and how much it has helped me and how cathartic it has been for me to talk about it and put it out there, has and I'll look back and like, well, maybe I should have sought counseling more, because I think talking to somebody, a third party or somebody who doesn't, is not biased to your story or to your situation, it helps tremendously.
Hmm. You know, you went through an extremely traumatic experience. I'm just kind of wondering, what did you feel like you experienced any symptoms from this trauma? Any behavioral changes in you um, from this? And even
Uh,
learning about what exactly happened from then?
Ironically, I think it just made me stronger in a weird way. And I say that because most people, and it's understood, right? Most people will go left. And what I mean by
Hmm.
left is no offense to people that left hand or right, or whatever. When I say go left, it's like go off the deep end.
Hmm.
It's like, you know, and not to mention, I come from an environment, a culture, very humbling, humble beginnings, 100 all African American community, not the best of neighborhoods, right? With drugs, filled with drugs. Not so much crime back then, but a lot of drugs and just not your best neighborhood, right?
Hmm.
But so I could have easily just latched on to the negative, you know, aspects of life and just could have been mad with the world,
Right.
based on what had could have been angry. But I chose a different route and I just think it just really empowered me. I said, I want to do better. That time I really didn't know how I was gonna do better, but I knew I wanted to do better. You know, I was speaking with someone in another interview a couple weeks ago, and I mentioned the fact that my family, my dad, and I, we were always like the oddball. I felt like we were the oddball, throughout the community, and especially going to family functions. I come from a large family. My dad's like one of 15 or 16. So we used to have big gatherings around the holidays throughout the year. And everybody else throughout the family, they show up full force. What I mean, you got the husband, the wife, the kids, and we were always just us two, right?
Mm-hmm.
We were living, our lifestyle was, I don't want to say fly by night, but my dad he was a local entrepreneur, big into politics, and we were just kind of day at a time, just
Hmm.
it wasn't never the formal. Let's sit at the table, have dinners, have breakfast. None of that. None of that ever happened because it was just us. I always refer to like we were kind of like brothers or roommates.
Mm.
The way I was raised to survive, not live.
Yeah.
That's how was raised, and also to add to that, my dad was a Marine, so you can only imagine the in-house training I received. So and guidance. So no, I really think it just made me stronger, which I'm glad it did, and just helped me push and push and push to be better and not, have this tragedy affect me in the future.
Yeah. It sounds like you had a really close relationship with your dad since it was just the two of you, right?
Yeah, like for obvious reasons. It's just
Right.
us, right? It's like
You were
he
bonded
wasn't the
together.
most. And I say this cautiously, right? When I say he wasn't the most loving dad, which means not that he didn't love me, he just really wasn't.
Affectionate.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
get look, military background, Marine. And again, I was raised to survive,
Hmm.
not live, because
Mm,
I think we were both in the survival mode at that point after my mom was murdered.
right.
So he's trying to provide, and a lot of things I learned, I credit him just as far as navigating the just this world, just navigating life. If you if you're going in one direction, you're blocked off. Hey, go around. If you go
Right.
around, you're blocked off. Maybe you need to back up and go the other way. You might need to step back a little bit to move forward. So all
Hmm.
those things, I learned just throughout my childhood and growing up.
When was it that your father was arrested? You were an adult.
Yeah. So forgive me for my, with COVID and everything, it's my
So,
time is
yeah,
off. But
it's like nothing existed during COVID. It's like a whole
right.
year didn't
So
exist.
exactly. So I currently live in Texas. I moved out of Louisiana in 2010 for a job opportunity in San Antonio. Um, I recall 2012 after work, I get a knock at the door. It was a local Texas Ranger, which is the state police for state of Texas. That's what they call them, Texas
Mm.
Rangers. So he shows up, fit in the title, cowboy hat, and I'm like, what did I do or what didn't I do? I'm like, I see a police officer at my door. But anyway, I was freaked out. I opened the door. He kindly introduced himself, and he's like, "You mind if I come in?" I said, "Yeah, sure." I said, "Am I in trouble?" He's like, "No." He kind of felt the nervousness. So no, he called me in. He had a few pictures, had a folder. He's like, "Yeah, I just want to kind of talk to you about your mother's murder." And I was like,
Ah,
"Okay." I'm like, "Did something come up?" He's like, "No, it's a cold
wow.
case." And so he asked a few questions there, and he asked, "Would I be willing to come down to like the substation the next couple of weeks to do a more formal interview?" I said, "Sure, I'll tell you what I remember." But the reason that they were involved is because at the time, Louisiana State Police, they were supposed to come out and interview me and talk to me, but it was like a hurricane or some bad weather going on. And apparently they was on a time crunch. So they coordinated with the Texas law enforcement. Say, hey, you go interview this guy for us and just send us back the notes. So that's why they got involved. So because it had no ties to Texas other than that.
Right.
So anyway, fast forward. I was like, okay. Fast forward, years went on after that. Several years went on, and then throughout those years, I talked with Louisiana law enforcement periodically, and they were just kind of like, well, we're looking at this case and kind of rehashing it out, looking at evidence, re-looking at evidence, and it's like, okay, that's fine or whatever. They just kind of keep me updated until I think the year before COVID actually happened.
Hmm.
That's maybe summer. I don't know. Again, at the end of work, I get a call. They called it a courtesy call. So I get a courtesy call from Louisiana State Police, and they were just saying that my father, along with a co-defendant, has been indicted and arrested for second degree murder and conspiracy of my mother.
Wow.
So I'm like, okay, this is weird. I'm like,
Right, right.
we're talking like almost 40 years later. At the time, um, probably a little right at 30 or 32 or whatever, but we're talking a long time later, right?
Right,
After
right.
actually. So I'm like, what is going again? I'm like, seriously? Like I have moved on, I'm trying to build a fan, at that time, our son wasn't born, but wait, maybe he was. Maybe or not yet. Anyway, I get that call. Again, my life just time stopped. I feel like my life been flipped upside down again. And
Yeah.
it's like, okay, here we go. Now, how are we gonna deal with this? So yeah, it was like I do remember on the brink of COVID when it was like really bad. You know, my dad was actually in jail. He was in
Wow.
jail. He was held on a $250,000 bond. Um, and yeah, I
Wow.
was I was faced with a challenge. I was like, okay, I got my dad in jail for at that time, accused, you know, of killing my mother. So I was fortunate to able, my wife and I, we talked about, we were able to move some things around financially. I was like, because $250,000 bond, just to add context to that, you don't have to put up 250 grand,
Right.
to get the person out. It was like 10% of that or 12, maybe 12% of that. So we were able to move some things around. Because at that point I was like, well, COVID's going on. I'm hearing the news and everything. They say it's really bad in the jails. My dad's up in age, and I was like, well, I don't want to lose another parent,
Mm-hmm.
you know. And I was like, well, I could always make more money. So let's. I was able to get him out after about 11, close to a year in, bond him out. He was on bond, out on bond, awaiting trial. The trial didn't come as quick as we thought because of COVID. It kept
Right.
getting pushed back and back and back and back. And finally, in 2022, November 2022, the trial happened, and that's when my life got flipped upside down again.
Wow. What did that do? How did you feel about that? What were the thoughts going through your head? I mean, the first time you were told that he was arrested, and then the second time when they found him guilty?
Yes. So just to give you a little time. So it was a co-defendant involved.
Mm-hmm.
Back then in the 80s, DNA wasn't available. But there's one key piece of evidence they had, and they had at house, was a cigarette butt. Apparently, they tested his cigarette butt, and it came back with a hit from a guy who I guess was already in the system, the CODIS system, the DNA system, for some other, I guess, crimes or whatever. So it came back with a hit. They ended up finding this individual in Atlanta under a bridge. He was homeless.
Mm.
So they arrested him, brought him into custody. And one of the things I think I read, one of his test statements, I'm sorry, was, "I'm the key to it all." So he had a twin brother, so he obviously was involved. So that they basically just kind of connected the dots. So that brought it, based on his early statement, implicated my dad. So that's why they presented to the grand jury and indicted both. So so that happened. That's what kind of brought everything together to light. And at that moment, to answer your question, it was so many things going through. I was like, somebody's lying. That's the first time. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
somebody's lying. This is not true. How am I gonna deal with this? Like, it was so much going on. And the main thing, it was just like, this can't be real. Like, they got it wrong. Like, it's no way over, close to 40 years later that you have no new evidence now.
Right.
Nothing new. Most of the potential witness or the people they interviewed in the past, maybe has passed on, or deceased now. So I'm like, if anything, the case got weaker because those individuals not no longer here.
Mm-hmm.
So no, it was most of the evidence was circumstantial, and it was a week long trial that I thought would have been longer, but it was a week long trial, 3 hour deliberation from the jury, and it was a Friday night, the Friday before the week of Thanksgiving,
Oh my gosh.
where he was found guilty and basically sentenced. Well, he wasn't sentenced at the time, but a guilty verdict of second degree murder is life in prison in Louisiana.
Wow. Did you ever confront him or question him about any of it?
Well, yeah, I've asked him, I've talked to him, we talked about it, and he still claims his innocence.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so it's just I don't know. It's a tough situation, to say the least, right? It's like,
Right.
and from the public perspective, like when he was indicted, with social media, people could be so just critical and harsh and negative, and
Yeah.
people was like, oh, local, like people in the community was like, oh, I knew he had something to do with it, blah blah blah, just all this blabber, and I had to take that in. I had a good friend of mine was like, don't look at it. I'm like, well,
Mm. That's hard. It's hard
it's
not
kind
to,
of hard
right?
not to, right?
Right. Yeah, I
I'm
know.
like, so yeah, he's like I say, I still talk to him. He calls from the jail periodically, from prison, and I chose to keep that relationship because I, the man that raised me, I just can't overnight look at him as a monster.
Yeah.
It's kind of hard. A lot of people don't understand that, but it's a weird dynamic, to be involved with, to just automatically turn your back against someone who's been there for you for the most part all these years growing up, did the best he could do. And then all of a sudden it's revealed that he could have possibly had a hand in the murder of my mother.
Yeah.
So
And then you wrote this book. Does your father know you wrote this book? Does he
yeah,
know, has he
yes.
read the book?
No, he hasn't read it yet. Because he's in a weird part of the jail or prison. It's like an intake facility. It takes time before he gets like permanent housing. And right now, he can't receive anything like
Mm,
external stuff. So like we talk, but he knows I wrote the book. I plan on sending once he able to get like a book. I plan on sending him a copy. Yeah.
wow. Wow. So with all of this that's happened, you lost your mother, then you lost your father 40 years later. What is your outlook on life? How are you? I mean, it obviously, I guess what they call post-traumatic growth. There was a lot of growth in you and having to survive all of this.
Mhm.
Um, but I'm curious, you have two young children, you know, how are you raising them and obviously I mean, I don't know how um are you going to talk to them about it? Obviously, when they're older and they
Yeah.
make when it's appropriate, not now,
Exactly. Right.
obviously.
Right. It's not appropriate now.
But with all
Uh,
of this that's happened, what are you thinking um for you and your future and the future of your children?
one thing I really try, and that's top of mind for me, is to express my love for them. Um, and I say that because a part of my book, a section is called I Love You." And what I mean by that is that's what I heard from my dad.
Yeah.
Like, I love you versus I love you. It sounds so simple, but it's so big. It's a big difference, When someone says, "Oh, I love you," versus "I love you." If you sit back and think about that, you're like, yeah, just that one word makes a huge difference.
Yeah.
And being raised in that environment and just hearing that majority of my life, it's like I knew he loved me, right? But it just wasn't um, shown. It wasn't expressed, to the level that I think it needed to be because I got a lot of faults, just being without a mother. My wife tells me all the time, she's like, you don't have any emotions, emotion. I'm like,
Mm.
I say, well, you got to understand where like how I was raised, my background. I didn't have that TLC. I didn't have that
Mhm.
tender love and care. If I accomplished something, if I achieved something, that's like good job. But I'm not sure if you have kids or not. But
Yeah.
as a mother, it's like, when mothers go over the top, for the smallest things. I didn't have that. For graduations, birthdays, accomplishments, get my new job, and get my first all that. I didn't have that mother figure, that mother support there. So that was a huge gap and absence in my life. So I just really, that's like I say, that's one of the things I would just really want to um, just focus on as far as raising our kids as a father. And also, I believe that every, at the end of every tunnel is some light somewhere.
Mhm.
You know, is people that experience trauma every day. It might not be to the extent of this, or may be worse. But I really want to enforce the fact that, like the old saying, if there's a will, there's a way. It really is. That's really true.
Mhm.
You are what or situations are what you make of it. It's a saying that I'm not sure. I'm not the, I can't quote it. I don't know who the original statement was made by or saying, but it's like life is 10% what happens and 90% how you respond,
Right.
which is true.
Yeah.
It's like it's how you respond to situations and challenges is that's the more definitive way of how that kind of dictates your outcome.
Mhm. Yeah.
So God's will, I just want to be there for my family, and just identifying, like I said earlier, I think this whole traumatic situation made me stronger because it made me want the things that I didn't have.
Mm.
It made
Yeah.
me want to have, which, and now I'm like, people don't sit at the dinner table now, I don't think. But it makes me want to have that full family. It makes me want to not be the oddball, or my family to be the oddball in situations or scenarios. It's like it just makes me strive to say, I want the best for myself and my family, and I'm just gonna keep pushing. You know,
Mm. And create that life for your family. And in your defense, because I'm a trauma survivor, I'm a childhood sexual abuse survivor. You know, as a mother, I have a 9-year-old and a 6-year-old. And I
okay,
have to say, there are times where I'm not as affectionate as I could be. And I think that's me in survival mode. I feel like I could have had a lot more love in my family. Um,
right,
with the and I think, obviously sometimes patterns get passed down. Sometimes you break those patterns. I'm currently trying to break many patterns that I
right.
have created through childhood into young adulthood and as a parent. Um, so it's just work. It's constant work when you're constantly in survival mode, trying to get out of realizing that you are not in danger constantly is a difficult task.
It is because it's always on your mind because you're
Mm.
more cognizant of it, and I know for me, like like you say, it's always there. I'm like, and I wanted to be organic, which it is, but at the same time, it's always there. Like if I see, because obviously we are what our parents are.
Mm-hmm.
I could come
Yeah.
across, as I think, yeah, a couple weeks, well, maybe last week, my wife was like, I feel bad. Our son's name is Lathan, which is my middle name. So I
Mm.
feel bad that we treat Lathan older than he is sometimes. And I'm like, I don't feel bad because this is a brutal world. Like
Right.
this world, you, it's worse
Mm.
now.
It'll eat you up.
It will eat you up, spit you out, eat you again. And I'm like, I don't feel bad because I think it's a fine line. It's like I want him to be you out like me. My dad wanted me to know how to navigate.
Mm-hmm.
I did a lot of things on my own at a early age,
Yeah.
at a very early age.
Yeah. You
As
experience
far,
more than most people will ever experience at 6.
yeah, and it's like early on, it's like my dad's trying to be a survival. Well, he's trying to be a supporter of the house and of our household or our family. And this time he had to go to business meetings. This time I had to stay home by myself, not at 6, but earlier than most kids, right? Because you got
Right.
one parent.
Right.
We didn't have like a nanny or just sometimes he may have to step out for an hour or two, and he's like, "Look, give me instructions. Lock up. Don't open the door. I'll be back." And this time I thought he would never come back
Mm.
because of my
Lack
mom
of
never came
home.
back.
Yeah.
So it was two fears. I was like, I'm at home by myself, and I fear like, maybe my dad won't come back.
Wow.
So I say all that to say is like I want our kids to be strong, but at the same time I don't want to not show them the love, the TLC. I want to I try more. Like I mentioned, I'm more cognizant of like, okay, if it's a situation, I like, okay, I got to be more loving. I make it a point. I tell my son every day, I love you. I hug him. We hug. And I play with him. But and the way he shows love, he wants to fight. He wants to play Spider Man. He wants to beat me up all the time. But anyway,
Oh, wow. Well, it sounds like you're doing a fantastic job as a parent. It's hard being a healing parent. But you do what you can, you break cycles. Is there anything else that you'd like to add?
you know, um, thanks for having me, and I'll just share that. Like I mentioned earlier, it's a light at the end of every tunnel. And that's one of my goals writing this book. I'd say, it's now with social media and everybody's living great. That's what you see, right?
Yeah.
Everybody has the best life. They're always on the beach. Like, really, I didn't know they had that many beaches. I'm like, everybody's on the beach. Everybody's just living a great life. That's what we see, but that's not reality.
Right.
That's not reality. And I think we need to share stories, especially the messy ones, because the
I
messy
agree.
ones help people. And
That's right.
and one thing I just really just want to emphasize is that I'm a normal person. And what I mean by that is, it's okay to have idols. Most people's idols are, um, like superstars, athletes, actors, actors, whatever. But I just want to encourage people that, you know, that saying. I think it's Drake. I started from the bottom, now I'm here. Like literally, I'm a normal person that just worked hard.
Yeah.
It's just foundational, working hard and just built and created the life that I wanted. And I just want to encourage people who read my book, hear my story, that if you're dealing with trauma, you know, it's ways to navigate that and really just make it through life and be successful and be happy.
No. Well, I appreciate that. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful that to have you on today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your time.
Absolutely. That was Reginald Reed, author of The Day My Mother Never Came Home. For more information on Reggie and where to purchase his book, and you definitely should, you have to check out the show notes. May's issue of Authentic Insider is out. Check out Authentic Insider at traumasurvivorthriver.com. That's traumasurvivorthriver.com, as well as past episodes of a Trauma Survivor Thrivers podcast. If you haven't already, please subscribe to my email list to get Authentic Insider magazine in your inbox monthly. That wraps up season 5 of a Trauma Survivor Thrivers podcast. Join us in the fall when we are back with more great episodes and amazing guests. Thank you for listening to a Trauma Survivor Thrivers podcast. I'm Lori Lee Benstock. Take care.